I'll write the complete narrative in US English, following the premise and all the storytelling rules. Rain hammered the tall windows of Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital, and Rachel Palmer stopped so hard in the middle of the fourth-floor hallway that her clipboard slipped an inch in her fingers. Bear was doing it again. The big German shepherd had one paw hooked on the edge of the staff closet door, and his teeth were closing around that same faded blue uniform for the third night in a row. "Bear," she whispered, "please, not this again, not tonight. Before we go on, tell me in the comments what part of the world you are listening from right now, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one." Bear did not look at her. He never looked at her when he did this. He simply carried the folded uniform down the corridor with the careful mouth of a dog who had once been trusted to hold a newborn puppy, and he nosed open the door of room 402 with the flat of his snout. Rachel followed because she could not help it. There was something about the way the shepherd moved through the fourth floor after midnight that felt older than the building, older than her, older than the job she thought she understood. The bed in 402 had been stripped to the mattress for 2 days. The last patient there had gone home to his family with a walker, a paper bag of pills, and a note from the night nurse that read, "God bless you, Mr. Halloran." Now the bed sat under the pale fluorescent light like a waiting mouth, and Bear laid the folded blue uniform on it the way a bride's father might lay a wedding gown across a chair. He climbed up beside it, curled his heavy body against the fabric, and rested his chin on the small brown coffee stain that lived just above the chest pocket. Rachel stood in the doorway and felt something turn over under her ribs. She had worked as a nurse for 11 years. She had watched people die and watched people live, and watched the small, brutal miracles that passed between the two in a hallway at 3 in the morning. But this was different. This was a dog carrying grief around in his teeth, and she had no idea what to do with it. "Bear," she said, softer. "Come on, honey. Come on." The shepherd's ear flicked once. Nothing else moved. Rachel let the door fall shut behind her and walked back to the nurse's station with the guilty feeling that she had just intruded on a widow at her own kitchen table. She sat down. She wrote in the log. She did not write about Bear because she did not know how, and because Diane Kessler read the log every morning with the same flat mouth she had worn since her husband left her the summer of 2018. The uniform in 402 had belonged to Karen Whitfield. Rachel had cleaned out Karen's locker herself 6 months back because nobody else would. Karen's daughter had not come. Karen's ex-husband had not come. A cousin from Toledo had called the hospital once, asked if there was anything valuable, been told no, and never called again. So Rachel had folded Karen's things into a cardboard box with her own 2 hands. A hairbrush with a strand of grey tangled in the bristles. A paperback novel with the corner of page 112 turned down. A photograph of a young woman Rachel did not recognize. And uniforms, 4 sets of blue scrubs, worn soft from 1,000 washes. Rachel had donated 3 of them to the ward's shared closet, thinking someone on a double shift might need a clean set. She had kept the 4th out of a private stubbornness she could not explain, and then, 2 weeks later, when a new hire had shown up in street clothes with a torn sleeve, Rachel had folded that 4th uniform into the closet too, because she had run out of good reasons not to, the set with the coffee stain. Karen had spilled that coffee herself on a snowy morning 3 years back, laughing at something Frank Delgado said about the vending machine in the basement. Rachel remembered because she had been standing right there. She remembered because Karen had laughed like a woman 10 years younger, and because Frank had reached across the counter with a paper towel and dabbed at the stain like he was tending a wound, and because Karen had let him. They had known each other a long time, those two, the night shift nurse and the janitor who came on at 4 in the morning. They had drunk the same bad coffee in the same fluorescent break room for the better part of 2 decades. And now Karen was dead, 6 months in the cold ground, and Frank was 2 rooms down from 402 with a body that had forgotten most of what it used to do, and Bear was carrying that coffee-stained uniform out of a closet every single night. And Rachel Palmer did not know what any of it meant. She only knew that she was starting to believe it meant something. The next morning, Diane Kessler stood in the doorway of the closet with her hands on her hips and her mouth pulled into a line so straight it could have been drawn with a ruler. Rachel stood behind her, feeling like a teenager caught with a bad grade. "Third night in a row," Diane said. "Yes? And you did not stop him?" "I tried. He waits until I leave the hall." Diane turned around. Her face was tired in the way only head nurses' faces get, tired at the corners of the mouth, tired behind the ears, tired down into the bones. She had been the one who wrote the letter to the board 6 months back, asking them to keep Bear on the ward after Karen died. She had also been the one who told everyone, in the same flat voice she used for medication charts, that she did not particularly like dogs. "I want that closet locked at night," Diane said. "Starting tonight. There's a padlock in the maintenance office. Have Eddie put it on before shift change." "Diane, if we lock him out—" "Rachel," she held up one hand. The gesture was not unkind. It was only final. "This hospital cannot become a place where a dog decides what happens on my floor. I'm sorry. I know you loved her. We all loved her. But that shepherd is grieving in a way that is going to end with the patient tripping over him in the dark and breaking a hip. Lock the closet." "He's not in the hallway. He's inside a room." "Lock the closet." Rachel locked the closet. She did it herself before she left at 7 that evening. She snapped the padlock through the loop of the metal handle and felt the small, mean click of the mechanism travel up her wrist. Bear watched her from the far end of the corridor. He did not move. He did not blink. He watched her the way a dog watches a person who has just told a lie to another dog. And then he lay down in front of the door and waited. Rachel went home. She fed her cat. She sat on the edge of her bed with her hair still smelling of hospital hand soap, and she thought about the stain on the uniform and the way Karen had laughed that morning 3 years back. Then she took a sleeping pill she did not really need, and she lay in the dark for a long time, and she thought, "God, we are going to break that dog." She was right, and she was wrong. At 2:17 in the morning, the sound started. It began low, so low that the graveyard shift nurse on the 4th floor, a young man named Devon, thought at first it was the elevator cable settling. Then it grew. It rose out of the dog like something being pulled up from underwater, a note that was neither howl nor cry nor bark, but something in between, something that had never been meant for human ears in the first place. It filled the hallway. It slid under doors. It went into the ventilation and came out again in every room on the floor, and every patient who could open their eyes opened them, and every patient who could not still knew, somewhere in the wet dark of an 80-year-old dream, that something old and heartbroken was singing. Devon ran down the corridor with his phone in his hand. The shepherd was sitting bolt upright in front of the padlocked door with his head thrown back and his throat working, and Devon could not tell whether the sound was coming out of the animal or straight up out of the floor beneath him. Doors began to open. An old woman in 309 started to cry without knowing why. In 411, a man who had not spoken to his wife in 4 days reached across the sheet and took her hand. And in room 404, Frank Delgado, who had not made a single voluntary sound since the stroke had knocked him sideways 19 days earlier, opened his mouth. His wife had been dead for 6 years. His only son lived in Sacramento and had not called in 5 months. Since the ambulance had brought him in with his face gone slack on the left side and his right hand curled up like a small dead animal, Frank had done nothing but lie there and stare at the ceiling tiles and let the world happen around him. The physical therapist had said gently that sometimes stroke patients decide. Sometimes They decide to come back, and sometimes they decide not to. Frank had decided not to. Then Bear made that sound at the locked closet, and Frank Delgado, 67 years old, retired janitor, widower, forgotten father, decided again. "Karen," he said. It came out cracked and wet and barely above a whisper, but it came out. The word crawled up out of his ruined throat, and it hung in the fluorescent air of room 404, and it stayed there. "Karen, Karen, Karen." Devon heard it, because he was already running past the door with his phone to his ear, yelling for the charge nurse. He skidded to a stop. He looked into 404. He saw the old man on the bed, tears running sideways into the pillow, his good hand fumbling toward the call button, and he heard the word being said over and over like a rosary. "Karen, Karen, get Karen, please, Karen." Devon ran. Rachel got the call at 2:31. She was in her car 8 minutes later, with her jacket over her scrubs and her hair still tangled from the pillow. When she pushed through the double doors of the 4th floor, she did not go to the nurse's station. She did not go to the elevator. She went straight to the padlocked closet, and she took her own key out of her pocket, and she opened it. Bear stopped singing. He looked at her once, a long look, and then he stepped past her into the closet and pulled the coffee-stained uniform off the shelf, and he carried it, and Rachel walked behind him, and together they went into room 402, and the shepherd laid the folded blue fabric on the bed and climbed up beside it and put his chin on the coffee stain, and for the first time in 6 months he closed his eyes and truly slept. Rachel went to 404. Frank was still awake. He was still crying. When he saw her, his good hand rose 2 inches off the sheet and fell back, and he made a sound that might have been her name. "Frank," she said. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took the curled hand and held it, and it did not straighten, but it did not pull away. "Frank, honey, I'm here. What is it? What do you need?" His mouth worked. His jaw dragged sideways. The stroke had eaten most of one side of him, but it had not eaten the other. And out of that other side, one slow word at a time, came a story. He told her that Karen had been the one who found him. That morning in the parking lot, the morning of the stroke, the morning the whole world had tilted sideways under his feet, it had been snowing. Wet, heavy snow, the kind that turns the blacktop into a mirror. Frank had come out to his truck at 4:05 in the afternoon, off shift, his lunch pail in his hand, and one leg had simply refused to work. He had gone down between his own truck and the delivery van from the medical supply company, and he had lain there in the wet snow for a length of time he did not know how to measure, and he had watched his own breath go up in a thin white rope, and he had thought, well, this is how it goes then. Karen had come out of the loading dock door with a paper bag of scraps for Bear. She had run to him. She had gotten down on her knees in the snow with her uniform, this uniform, and she had put her hand under his cheek and she had said, Frank Delgado, don't you dare on my shift. She had called the ambulance. She had held his hand. And when he had turned his eyes toward Bear, who was standing behind her with his ears flat and his coat gone dark from the snow, Karen had understood the question without him having to ask it, because that was who she had been. She had said, he's safe. I promise you. Bear is safe no matter what. I will fix it. I will make them let him stay. You just come back, Frank. You just come back. And then she had gone to work her shift, and at 11:40 that night she had walked out to her own car in the same lot and had driven home the same road she drove every night, Route 9, and a man named Wayne Halloway, who had drunk 7 beers and a shot of bourbon at a bar called The Antler 2 towns over, had come across the yellow line in a Ford truck, and Karen had died before the paramedics could get to her. That had been 6 months ago. Frank had spent those 6 months believing, with the animal certainty of a man who had been born into a family that believed in promises, that Karen had died on her way home from making him a vow, that the last thing she had done in her life was tell a scared old janitor that his dog would be all right, and that if the dog was not all right, then the promise was broken, and the woman who had died keeping it had died for nothing. That was what he had been holding inside himself for 19 days on the 4th floor of Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital. That was what had eaten his voice. Rachel listened. She did not cry until he was finished, and even then she cried the way nurses cry, which is silently, into the crook of one elbow, without letting go of the patient's hand. "Frank," she said when she could speak, "Bear is safe. He's here. He's on the ward. He's on the bed in 402 right now, sleeping on her uniform." Frank's mouth twisted. "Then he knows," he said. "He knows she's gone." "Yes. He was waiting for her every night. He was going to the closet." "Every night." Frank shut his eyes. 2 more tears slid down. "Good boy," he whispered. "Good boy. Good boy." At 6 in the morning, Diane Kessler came onto the ward, and Rachel met her at the elevator with a cup of the bad break room coffee and told her everything. Diane drank the coffee. Diane did not sit down. When Rachel finished, the head nurse walked to the closet, unlocked the padlock with her own key, and dropped the padlock into the trash can beside the nurse's station. It made a small, mean sound going in. Then she went into 402 and stood over the bed for a long time with her arms folded across her chest. And Rachel watched from the doorway as Diane Kessler, who did not particularly like dogs, reached down and laid one hand flat between the shepherd's ears. Bear did not open his eyes, but his tail once lifted an inch off the mattress and fell. You would think that was the ending. Rachel thought so for about 8 days. Then the trouble started coming in from the outside. It began with a phone call from a man named Grant Whitfield. Grant was Karen's ex-husband. He lived in a suburb of Cincinnati with his second wife, and Rachel had seen him exactly once at Karen's funeral, standing at the back of the chapel in a suit that did not fit him, checking his watch every 3 minutes. He had not stayed for the burial. He had not written a note. Rachel had assumed he was one of those men who becomes a rumor after a divorce and then never becomes anything else. He called at 9:15 on a Thursday morning and asked for the head nurse. Diane took the call in her office. The door was closed. When she came out 20 minutes later, her mouth was doing the ruler-straight thing again, but there was something new in her eyes, something Rachel had never seen there before, and it took her a moment to place it. It was fear. "He wants the dog," Diane said. "What?" "Grant Whitfield, Karen's ex. He says the dog was legally his wife's property at the time of her death, and since he is her only legal next of kin, the dog belongs to him. He's coming Saturday to pick it up." Rachel put her hand on the counter to keep it steady. Diane, that's not how it works. Bear isn't a car. He's a dog," Diane said. "Legally, he's property. And Karen never put anything in writing. She was going to. She kept saying she was going to, and she didn't. Then he's the hospital's. He's not the hospital's. He was Karen's, and now he's Grant's, and Grant knows it. And Grant has already talked to a lawyer. And unless we can produce something in writing signed by Karen, he's coming Saturday." "Diane, that man hasn't been in her life for 11 years. "I know. He doesn't even want a dog. He wants—" Rachel stopped, because she did not know what he wanted, and she did not want to guess out loud in a hospital hallway. "He wants something," Diane said quietly. "I don't know what, but he wants something, and he thinks it starts with the dog." That night, Rachel went into 402 after the last med pass, and she sat on the edge of the bed beside Bear. And she talked to him the way she had once talked to her grandmother in the last week of her grandmother's life, which is to say, in a low voice, about nothing important, for a long time. Bear listened with his eyes half closed. When she stood up to leave, she smoothed the coffee-stained uniform flat with the palm of her hand, and her fingers brushed the chest pocket, and she felt something inside it. A small, hard rectangle, the size of a matchbook. Rachel had folded that uniform herself. She had folded it a dozen times over the past 6 months, into the closet, out of the closet, back into the closet again. She had never checked the pocket. Nobody checks a pocket on a piece of donated clothing that has already been through the wash 100 times. Nurses do not steal from each other's uniforms. She slid 2 fingers into the pocket. She drew out a folded square of paper, yellowed at the edges, the color of an old envelope, folded so many times that the creases had become part of the paper's grain. She turned it over in her palm. Written on the outside, in Karen Whitfield's small square handwriting, were 3 words: "For whoever finds." Rachel sat back down on the bed. Her hands were not entirely steady. Bear opened one eye and watched her, and she had the strange, prickling sense that the dog had been waiting for this too, and that she was not the first person the shepherd had led to that closet, only the first person who had finally listened. She unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in pen in Karen's tight little handwriting, on the back of a printed patient education pamphlet about diabetes. The date at the top was 2 weeks before Karen had died. "To whoever finds this," the letter began, "I am sorry to make you the one, but somebody has to be. My name is Karen Whitfield, and I've been a nurse on the 4th floor of Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital for 18 years. I am not going to the police because I do not think the police will believe me, and I am not going to the administrator because I do not think the administrator wants to hear it. I'm going to write it down, and I am going to leave it where I know somebody honest will find it, and I am going to trust the way people trust when they have nothing else left to trust with." Rachel's mouth went dry. "There is a man on this floor," the letter said, "who is not who he says he is. He has been coming here for 4 months. He works in the pharmacy on the 2nd floor 2 nights a week. His badge says one name. His face and his voice tell me another. I know him from before. I know what he did. I know why he changed his name. And I know what he is doing here. He is taking things. Small things. Things nobody misses because nobody counts them the way I count them. Fentanyl patches, morphine ampules, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. Never enough to trip an audit, always enough to move. I have watched him for 4 months. I have written down every time. I have the dates, I have the drawer numbers, I have the shifts he works. I have kept a little notebook in my locker, and I am afraid to leave it in my locker because he has been in the break room twice when my locker was open. I am going to hide this in the pocket of my uniform because he will never look for it there. If you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and I need you to do 3 things. 1. Take my little green notebook out of the false bottom of my locker. It is under the lining. There is a slit in the fabric on the left side. Reach in. 2. Take the notebook to Detective Marian Alvarez at the Millbrook Police Department, not the front desk, not the tip line. Detective Alvarez. She's the only one I have talked to about this, and she believed me, and she asked me to bring her the notebook when I was ready. I got scared. I did not bring it. Please, whoever you are, bring it now. 3. Take care of Bear. He does not know how to be alone. He was somebody's dog once, before he was mine, and somebody hurt him, and it took me a long time to teach him to sleep. Please do not let him sleep alone. The name of the man in the pharmacy is on the back of this page. I'm afraid to write it here in case someone else finds this before you do. Signed, Karen Whitfield. October 3rd. Please do the right thing. Rachel turned the paper over. On the back, in the same tight handwriting, 1 word: Halloway. Rachel Palmer sat on the edge of a hospital bed at 4 minutes past midnight with a dead woman's letter in her hand and a sleeping German shepherd against her thigh and a name burning in front of her eyes that she had heard in this same hospital less than 3 hours ago. Wayne Halloway, The drunk driver, the man who had crossed the yellow line on Route 9. Rachel folded the letter 3 times. She slid it back into the pocket of the coffee-stained uniform. She put her hand on the shepherd's shoulder, and she said very softly, "Bear. Good boy, good boy." Then she went downstairs and she woke up Diane Kessler at home on her cell phone, and she said, "Diane, I found something. I need you to meet me at the hospital right now." Diane came in her raincoat with pajama pants under it. They sat in the head nurse's office with the door closed, and Rachel spread the letter flat on the desk between them, and neither of them spoke for a long time. The building hummed around them the way old hospitals hum, low and constant, like an animal breathing. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a call bell was ringing. "October 3rd, Diane said finally. She wrote this on October 3rd. And she died. October 17th, 2 weeks later. Diane closed her eyes. "Oh, Karen, oh, honey, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something?" She was scared. She was never scared. Not of anything. In 18 years, I never saw that woman be scared of one single thing. Not a code, not a family, not a doctor twice her size. She wasn't a scared person. She was scared of him. Diane opened her eyes. "Halloway," she said. "Halloway is the drunk driver." Yes, the drunk driver who supposedly drove across the yellow line on Route 9 at 11:40 at night. Yes, on the same road she drove home every night. Yes. They looked at each other. "Diane," Rachel said, "what if it wasn't an accident?" Diane Kessler was quiet for a very long moment. Then she reached across the desk and took Rachel's hand, and her fingers were surprisingly warm, and she said, "Then we are the only 2 people in this world right now who know it, and we are going to be very, very careful about what we do next. Do you hear me? Yes? We are going to go to Karen's locker, right now, before this shift changes, and we are going to find that green notebook, if it is still there, and then we are going to make a decision." They went to Karen's old locker. It had been reassigned to a new nurse named Priya, who had put a photograph of 2 toddlers on the inside of the door and a plastic pouch of vitamin gummies on the top shelf. Diane apologized silently to nobody in particular and knelt down and ran her fingers along the left side of the metal floor where the lining had once been. The lining was still there, the slit was still there, and inside the slit was a small spiral notebook with a green plastic cover, worn soft at the corners, warm from the metal of the locker. Rachel opened it. The first page was a list of dates, drawer numbers, and initials in Karen's small handwriting. The last entry was dated October 16th, the day before she died. Diane sat back on her heels. Her mouth was doing the ruler-straight thing again, but her eyes were wet. "All right," she said. "All right, in the morning, I'm calling Detective Alvarez, and then I'm calling our lawyer, and then I'm calling the board. And you, Rachel, you are going home, and you are going to sleep, because you have been up for 20 hours, and you are going to fall over." "Diane, Grant Whitfield is coming Saturday for Bear?" "I know." "If he takes the dog?" Diane looked at her. "He is not taking the dog," she said quietly. "Rachel, look at me. He is not taking the dog. That dog is the only witness left who knew both of them, the nurse who died and the man who killed her. Do you understand me? That dog is not going anywhere until we have answers. I do not care what a lawyer in Cincinnati says about property law." Rachel went home. She did not sleep. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling, and she thought about Karen Whitfield kneeling in the snow beside Frank Delgado with a paper bag of scraps for a stray dog in her hand. And she thought, you knew that morning that something was coming. You made that promise to Frank because you were afraid you might not be around to keep it yourself. You were saying goodbye, and you did not even tell him. The next morning, Detective Marian Alvarez, a small woman with a big voice and a badge she wore on a lanyard around her neck, walked into Diane Kessler's office at 8:45 in the morning and closed the door behind her. She stayed for 90 minutes, When she came out, she said only two things to Rachel, who had been hovering at the nurse's station, pretending to fill out a chart. The first thing was, "Ma'am, do not talk to anybody about this. Not your husband, not your best friend, not your priest, nobody." The second thing was, "Where is the dog?" They took Bear down to 404 to see Frank first. Rachel wanted him to. She thought Frank should know, before anything else happened, that the shepherd was going to be all right. That the promise Karen had made in the snow that morning was going to hold. Frank was sitting up. Physical therapy had come at 7 and had gotten him upright against the pillows for the first time. His good hand was on the sheet. His bad hand was in his lap. When Bear walked into the room, the shepherd went straight to the side of the bed and put his chin on Frank's leg, and Frank looked down at him with an expression Rachel would remember for the rest of her life. It was the expression of a man who has just been forgiven for something he did not know he was carrying. "Hey, buddy," Frank said. The word came out crooked, but it came out. "Hey, good boy, good boy." Bear did not move. He stood with his chin on Frank's leg, and he stayed that way for a long time. Detective Alvarez watched from the doorway with her arms folded. When Rachel finally looked over at her, the detective's face was doing the thing that Diane Kessler's face had done the night before, the same softening at the corners, and Rachel understood, with a kind of tired gladness, that they were now 3. That afternoon, Rachel took her lunch break in the parking lot in her car so she could cry without anybody seeing. When she came back inside, Diane was waiting at the elevator. "Grant Whitfield is downstairs," Diane said, "in the lobby. He came early. Saturday isn't for 2 days. He knows. He said he was in town on business and thought he'd stop by to look at the dog. To look at... That is what he said." Rachel went down to the lobby. Grant Whitfield was a tall, soft-jawed man in his early 50s, with the kind of tan that comes from a booth, not a beach. He wore a windbreaker and a wedding ring that did not match the one he had worn at Karen's funeral. He was standing by the coffee cart pretending to read a brochure about heart attack warning signs. He looked up when Rachel walked in, and he smiled the way a real estate agent smiles. "You must be Rachel Palmer, charge nurse, 4th floor. Karen was my friend." "Ah." His smile adjusted itself. "Yes, terrible thing, just terrible. I was hoping to see the dog, the shepherd. Karen wrote me about him, actually, some time back." Rachel's mouth did not move. "Did she?" she said. "Oh, yes. She was very fond of it, well, of him. Sorry, very fond of him. And I was thinking, that since I'm his legal owner now, and since he's obviously a working dog, I want to make sure he goes somewhere he'll be really taken care of. My sister-in-law breeds shepherds, beautiful place out in Kentucky, 10 acres. He'd be happy there, much better than a hospital hallway, don't you think?" Rachel put her hands in her pockets so that Grant Whitfield could not see them curl into fists. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. When was the last time you saw Karen?" His face did something small. Just approximately." "Well, we were divorced a long time, 11, 12 years. But she and I stayed in touch. Christmas card, that kind of thing." "Uh-huh. And when was the last time you were physically in this state before today?" He blinked. "I don't see, Mr. Whitfield." Rachel took one step closer to him. She spoke very quietly, because Diane was watching from the far end of the lobby, and Detective Alvarez was standing behind the information desk, pretending to look at a map of the building. And Rachel understood, in the way you understand these things without being told, that this was a moment that mattered. The dog is a working therapy animal at this facility. He has an official badge from the hospital board. He is currently assigned to a specific patient who is recovering from a stroke. He is not, at this moment, available for transfer to any private party. Not on Saturday, not tomorrow, not today. When this hospital's legal department has finished reviewing the circumstances of Karen's death, we will contact you. Do you have a card?" Grant Whitfield's smile went away completely. "I don't think you understand," he said, "how the law works. I have a signed opinion from... I understand how the law works, sir. I also understand that no dog is being handed to anybody from this hospital until we finish reviewing the circumstances of the previous owner's death. If you want to expedite that review, you are welcome to explain to Detective Alvarez over there why you already know from 3 states away that Bear is a working therapy animal, because that was not in the news. That was not in the obituary, and it was not, to my knowledge, in any Christmas card. Have a nice afternoon, Mr. Whitfield." He stared at her for 4 seconds, his nostrils flared. Then he turned around and he walked out of the lobby with his shoulders too straight, and Rachel realized her knees were shaking so hard she had to sit down on the arm of a waiting room chair. Diane came over. She put a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Was that all right?" Rachel whispered. "That was all right," Diane said. "Rachel, look at me. That was more than all right." But Diane was wrong, and both of them found that out 3 hours later. At 4:15 that afternoon, while Rachel was doing rounds, an orderly came running up to her from the elevator. His face was grey. "Miss Palmer, Bear, the dog. He's down at the loading dock. Somebody let him out." Rachel dropped the chart she was holding. The loading dock was the door at the back of the building where the medical supply trucks came in, where Karen used to feed the stray shepherd from a paper bag, where Frank Delgado had gone down in the snow. It was the one exterior door on the ground floor that a dog bear's size could nose open if the deadbolt was not thrown, and it was the door that any staff member with a key card could unlock and prop. By the time Rachel got there, the door was standing open. The parking lot behind it was empty, and Bear was gone. She stood at the top of the loading dock steps with her hand over her mouth, and she looked out at the wet grey afternoon, and she felt the whole thing coming apart in her chest, and she thought, "We lost him. Somebody took him. Grant Whitfield took him. We locked the closet, and now we lost the dog." Then from behind the delivery van across the lot, a big square dark shape came around the corner at a slow, deliberate walk. Bear had something in his mouth. Rachel came down the steps. Her feet forgot to be careful. The shepherd walked to her, dripping wet, his coat black with rain, and he sat down on the wet asphalt at her feet, and he opened his mouth, and he laid something on the toe of her shoe. It was a wallet. A cheap brown leather wallet, soaked, the corners peeled up, the plastic window on the inside fogged with rainwater. Rachel picked it up with 2 fingers. She opened it. Behind the fogged plastic was a Wisconsin driver's license with an unfamiliar photograph, and beneath it, in raised black letters, a name: Wayne Halloway. The address was in Millbrook, 6 blocks from the hospital. Rachel's whole body went cold. Bear was staring up at her. His eyes were the color of caramel, and they were absolutely still. Rain ran off his ears in 2 straight lines. Rachel got down on her knees on the wet asphalt, and she put both hands on either side of the shepherd's face, and she pressed her forehead to his forehead, and she stayed there while the rain came down on both of them. "Where?" she said. "Where did you find this?" Bear turned his head. He looked back across the parking lot, past the delivery van, toward the alley on the other side that ran between the hospital and the old laundry building next door. "Show me," Rachel said. She stood up. Bear stood up. Together they walked across the wet lot, and Bear led her into the alley, and at the far end of the alley, tucked behind a dumpster that had not been emptied in a week, Bear stopped in front of a small, unmarked side door in the back wall of the hospital's own pharmacy annex. The door was unlocked. It should not have been. Rachel took 2 steps back. She took her phone out of her pocket with a hand that was not entirely under her control. She called Detective Alvarez. She said, "Detective, it's Rachel Palmer. You need to come to the north alley of Cedar Hill Memorial right now. I have Wayne Halloway's wallet in my hand, and I have a door that is standing open that should not be standing open. And I think the dog just showed me where he goes in and out." Detective Alvarez was there in 9 minutes. The pharmacy annex was a small two-room addition on the back of the main pharmacy, built in the 1990s, used mostly for storage of controlled substances, waiting for restock. The door in the alley was supposed to be locked from the outside at all times. The only way to unlock it, according to the maintenance records, was from the inside, by somebody standing in the annex with a key. That meant somebody had to have opened it deliberately from within the hospital more than once and left it that way. Detective Alvarez went in with two uniformed officers. Diane Kessler and Rachel waited outside in the alley with Bear between them. It had stopped raining. The sun was trying to come through, a thin grey sun, the kind that does not quite warm you. Bear leaned against Rachel's leg. She kept her hand on his head. She did not take it off. When Detective Alvarez came out, 40 minutes later, her face was set in a way Rachel had not seen before. "You are both going to want to go home," she said. "What did you find?" Diane said. "I cannot discuss an active investigation." "Detective Diane." Alvarez looked at her. "I cannot discuss an active investigation, but I can tell you that as of this moment, that annex is a sealed crime scene, and I need you to make sure nobody from your staff goes near it. I also need you to know that we are going to be looking very carefully at the personnel records of every employee who has worked in that pharmacy in the last 12 months, including any employee who might be working under a name that is not their name." Diane's hand went to her mouth. "Was he in there?" Rachel said. "Rachel, go home, please. Take a shower, eat something, come back tomorrow morning." "Was Wayne Holloway in there?" Detective Alvarez looked at her for a long moment. "There is a body in there," she said quietly. "It has been in there for some time. I am not going to tell you who it is because I do not yet know for a fact. But I will tell you that the dog did not find that wallet in the parking lot. He found it inside, and he brought it out." Rachel put both hands on Bear's shoulders. "Go home," Detective Alvarez said. Her voice was not unkind. "Both of you, and take the dog with you tonight. Do not leave him in the hospital. Do you understand me? Do not leave him in the hospital. I do not want any employee of yours near that shepherd until I know who has been in that annex and who has not. Rachel, do you have a fenced yard?" "Yes." "Good. He goes home with you tonight." Rachel drove Bear home in the passenger seat of her Honda with a blanket she kept in the trunk spread across the upholstery. He sat like a person. He looked out the window like a person. When she opened the front door of her small blue house on Lilac Street, he walked in as if he had been coming home there his whole life, drank a bowl of water she filled for him, walked into her bedroom and lay down on the rug beside her bed. He was asleep before she finished brushing her teeth. She lay awake for a long time with her hand hanging off the edge of the mattress, her fingers in his fur, and she thought about all the things she did not yet understand, and she thought about the shape of Karen Whitfield's handwriting, and she thought, "You did this. Somehow, from wherever you are, you did this. You put that letter in that pocket, and you fed that dog behind the loading dock, and you knelt in the snow with Frank Delgado, and you did this." She fell asleep with her hand in the shepherd's fur. The next day was the day everything cracked open. Detective Alvarez called at 7:30 in the morning. She asked Rachel to come down to the station. She said the words privately and carefully, and Rachel wrote them down as she heard them, because she was afraid she would forget them if she did not. The body in the pharmacy annex was that of a man named Bradley Holloway. He was Wayne Holloway's older brother. He had been reported missing in Wisconsin 4 months earlier. Cause of death was still being determined, but appeared to be an overdose. Wayne Holloway, the drunk driver who had killed Karen on Route 9, was in fact not named Wayne Holloway at all. He was named Wayne Corrigan. He had a prior conviction in Indiana for the theft of controlled substances from a hospital pharmacy where he had worked as a night shift technician under yet a different name. When he had been released early on probation, he had moved to Ohio. He had taken his dead brother's identification, and he had gotten himself hired at Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital as a part-time pharmacy tech, working 2 nights a week under the name Wayne Holloway. Karen Whitfield had recognized him. Rachel understood, sitting across from Detective Alvarez at a scarred wooden desk in a room that smelled of burned coffee, that Karen had recognized him because Karen's own father, who had been a pharmacist in Fort Wayne for 41 years before he retired, had been the man whose store Wayne Corrigan had first been caught robbing. Karen had seen his face in the paper when she was in her 20s. She had been at the courthouse the day her father testified. She never forgot a face. Everyone on the ward had known that about her. You could show Karen Whitfield a photograph of a patient's grandson from 10 years back, and she would tell you the child's name. She had recognized him. She had started counting. She had written him down in a little green notebook. She had gone to Detective Alvarez. She had promised herself she would bring the notebook in that Friday. And on Thursday night, Wayne Corrigan, wearing the name of a brother he had already killed and hidden in a locked pharmacy annex, had followed her out of the hospital parking lot in his brother's truck and had run her off the road on Route 9. He had not been drunk. That had been staged. He had walked away with only a bruised sternum, and he had cried in the ambulance about how his life was over, and everyone had believed him because he was a man in tears, and Karen had died, and it was easier to believe a story that was already the shape of a familiar tragedy. He had been coming back to work at the pharmacy annex twice a week ever since, slipping in and out of the alley door, continuing to move the fentanyl and the morphine in the same drawers, on the same nights, because nobody had ever noticed and because the only nurse who had ever noticed was dead. And then a stroke had knocked Frank Delgado sideways in a parking lot, and a shepherd who had been sleeping on top of a coffee-stained uniform in a locker room for 6 months had begun, night after night, to carry that uniform out of a closet and lay it on an empty bed. "He knew," Rachel said. She was crying without noticing. Bear knew. He knew she wasn't coming back, but he wouldn't stop asking. "Dogs know," Alvarez said. "I have been in this job for 22 years. Dogs know a lot of things we do not." "Where is Wayne?" "Where is who?" "Corrigan. Wayne Corrigan. Where is he?" Detective Alvarez looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "We picked him up last night at his apartment. He is downstairs. He is not going home." "Does he know?" "Does he know what?" "Does he know that a dog found him?" Alvarez almost smiled. "No, ma'am," she said. "He does not know that a dog found him, and I am not going to be the one who tells him." Rachel went back to the hospital. She did not go to the 4th floor. She walked past the elevator and she went out the back door of the lobby, and she stood in the parking lot in the wet grey morning, and she looked at the loading dock, and she thought about a woman kneeling in the snow with her hand on a stranger's cheek, saying, "Frank, don't you dare on my shift." She thought about a paper bag full of table scraps for a stray. She thought about a folded letter in a pocket. And then she went back inside and she got in the elevator, and she went up to 404, and she sat down beside Frank Delgado's bed, and she told him everything. Frank listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he closed his eyes, and 2 tears ran sideways into his pillow, the same as before, and he said, good girl, Karen, good girl. I knew you kept it." "Kept what?" Rachel said. "The promise." Rachel could not answer for a moment. Then she said, "Frank, she kept 2 of them. She kept the one about Bear, and she kept the one about the notebook. She was going to bring it in that Friday. She just didn't get the chance. So we brought it in for her. Bear and Diane and me, and you. You brought it in too, because if you hadn't come back to your voice that night at the closet, none of us would have looked in that pocket." Frank's good hand moved slowly across the sheet. It found her hand. His fingers curled around hers. His grip was weak, but it was there. "Bring him," Frank said. She brought Bear up from the head nurse's office, where he had been napping on a folded coat under Diane's desk. The shepherd walked into 404, and he went straight to the bed, and he put his head on Frank's chest, and Frank put his good hand on the back of the shepherd's neck, and the two of them sat that way for a long time, while Rachel stood in the doorway and did not try to stop the tears anymore. You would think that was the ending too. It was not. There was still Grant Whitfield. Because now that Karen's death was officially reclassified as a homicide, the estate had to be reopened, and everything that had been Karen's property at the moment of her death became a matter of public record. Bear, technically, was part of that estate. Grant Whitfield, who had crawled out from under a rock 200 miles away the moment he heard, was still legally her next of kin. And Grant Whitfield, it turned out, had been renting a 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Millbrook, Ohio, for the last 5 months. Detective Alvarez told Rachel this over coffee in the hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday morning at 9:10. "Wait," Rachel said. "He lives here. He has been living here, in Millbrook, for a little over 5 months, under the name Grant Whitfield, so no reason for it to come up in an ordinary background check. He rented it 3 weeks before Karen died." "Detective." "I know. He knew Wayne Corrigan. He knew Wayne Corrigan." "I cannot say that yet." "Detective, please." Alvarez looked at her. Her eyes were tired. "We are working on that connection right now," she said. "But you and I did not have this conversation. Do you understand me?" Rachel put her cup down. Her hands were steady. She was surprised to notice that her hands were steady. "I understand you," she said. That afternoon, Grant Whitfield's lawyer, a young man from a firm in Cincinnati that had a website with a lot of American flags on it, filed an emergency petition in Butler County Probate Court demanding the immediate return of the animal known as Bear, property of the estate of Karen Whitfield, currently being unlawfully withheld by Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital. A hearing was set for the following Monday morning at 9. The petition mentioned, in a footnote, that failure to release the animal by 5 o'clock Friday afternoon would result in a request for contempt. The clock was now officially running. Diane Kessler read the petition at her desk on Thursday morning with her reading glasses at the end of her nose. When she was done, she took the glasses off and she looked up at Rachel and she said, "This man is a piece of work." "Diane." "Sit down." Rachel sat down. "I have thought about this all night," Diane said. "And I want to walk you through what I think is going on, because I want you to tell me if I am crazy." "Okay." Grant Whitfield left Karen 11 years ago for a woman named Sheila from his gym. Karen never remarried. Karen was, as far as I know, at peace with the whole thing by the time she died. She used to say Grant was the best decision she ever accidentally made, because he taught her she could live alone and be happier. Fine, that is history. Right. Now, in April of this year, Karen inherited $72,000 from an aunt in Sandusky. Cash inheritance. She told me about it. She was going to use some of it to fix the roof on her house and put the rest into a certificate of deposit. She had not touched it yet when she died. It just sat there in her savings account, $72,000. Rachel closed her eyes. "Diane." "That money went to Grant as next of kin, along with the house, which is worth about 180, and her retirement account, which is about 90. Karen never redid her paperwork after the divorce. Not the beneficiary forms, not the will, nothing. She always meant to, and she never did. So when she died, Grant got everything, every single thing she owned, including a dog." Diane. Grant Whitfield moved to Millbrook, Ohio, 3 weeks before Karen Whitfield died on Route 9. He moved here. He rented a house. He was in this town, and now he wants the dog. Rachel opened her eyes. "You think he knew Wayne?" "I think," Diane said very slowly, "that Grant Whitfield rented a house in Millbrook because he was planning to be here on the day something happened to his ex-wife. And I think Wayne Corrigan is going to have a lot to say about that. Once his own lawyer gets done explaining to him what happens to a man who is on the hook for one murder alone versus a man who agrees to say who the other person in the room was. Rachel sat with that for a long moment. Diane, if that is true, if he is trying to get the dog, why, what does the dog matter? Diane picked up her reading glasses again. She looked at the petition on her desk. She looked at Rachel. Because, she said, the dog is the only living thing that saw them together if they were together, and because he knows, the same way we know, that Karen kept a notebook. And the same way we found a letter in a pocket, he thinks there might be something else. Something in the dog's collar, something in the dog's things, something, he does not know what. He just knows that his ex-wife was the kind of woman who wrote things down and hid them, and that she loved that dog like family, and that if she was going to leave one last piece of evidence behind, it might be somewhere near that dog. He wants the dog, because he wants to be the first one to look. Do you understand me? He wants to be the first one who gets to search him. Rachel stared at her. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Yeah. We have to check. We are going to check." They took Bear into an empty exam room on the second floor with the door locked, and they took off his collar, and they laid it on a metal tray, and they looked at every inch of it with a magnifying glass. Nothing. They ran their fingers through his coat. Nothing. They looked at his tags. Nothing. Rachel sat back on her heels. "Diane, there's nothing. There's nothing on him. So maybe you're wrong. Maybe Grant just wants..." "Rachel." Diane was staring at the shepherd. "The pouch." Rachel looked. Bear was wearing his hospital therapy vest, the little blue one the board had given him after Karen died, the one with the badge sewn on the side that said Bear, Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital, Certified Companion Animal. On the front of the vest was a small zippered pocket the size of a wallet for carrying business cards, treats, whatever a volunteer might want. It had never occurred to Rachel to look in it. Nobody had ever put anything in it. Diane unzipped it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Rachel and Diane looked at each other. Diane's fingers were shaking. She unfolded it very slowly. It was a photocopy of a savings account statement, dated the week before Karen died, showing a balance of $72,341. Across the top, in Karen's handwriting, 3 words, "For my dog," and below it, another line in the same hand. "If anything happens to me, this money goes to Bear. See attached notarized letter in the safe deposit box at First Federal, Box 721, key at Diane Kessler's house." Diane put her hand over her mouth. "Oh, Karen," she whispered. "Oh, my girl." "She left him money," Rachel said. "She left the dog money. She left him $72,000. She left him her aunt's inheritance. She left it to the dog. And she made me the key holder, Rachel. She named me. I did not know. When she gave me a key," Diane said. Her voice was strange. 2 months before she died. "Just a house key," she said. "In case she got locked out and needed me to run over. I put it in my kitchen drawer. I forgot about it. Rachel, that key is still in my kitchen drawer." They drove to Diane's house together with Bear in the back seat. The key was in a small blue envelope with Karen's handwriting on the front. Inside the envelope was a second, smaller envelope, sealed. Inside that were 2 items. One was a safe deposit key. The other was a folded document, notarized, dated 7 months before Karen's death. It was a simple legal declaration, executed at a little strip mall notary office 2 towns over, and it said in plain language that if Karen Whitfield should die before executing a formal will, her savings account at First Federal and any monies contained therein were intended for the care and welfare of one German shepherd, common name Bear, and that Diane Kessler, RN of Millbrook, Ohio, was authorized to act as trustee for such care until the dog's natural death. It was notarized. It was signed. It was witnessed by two people whose signatures Rachel did not recognize. Diane sat down on her own kitchen floor and cried. Rachel sat down beside her. Bear lay down between them with his chin on Diane's ankle. Outside, the afternoon light was going gold at the edges of the yard. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor was mowing a lawn. It was Thursday afternoon, in the middle of the world, and two nurses were sitting on a linoleum floor with a dog and a piece of paper, and it was the biggest moment of the week, and nobody in Millbrook, Ohio, knew it but them. Diane, Rachel said finally. Diane, this isn't a will. It's a trust, kind of. It's a directive. Diane wiped her face. Our lawyer is going to have to look at it, but Rachel, if this is real, if this is what it looks like, Grant Whitfield does not own that dog. I do. And more importantly, that dog owns $72,000, and that $72,000 does not go to Grant Whitfield. It stays with Bear, which means Grant does not get his ex-wife's inheritance. Oh, Rachel, that's the motive? Oh, not the drugs, not just the drugs, that was Wayne. Grant knew Karen had money coming to her from that aunt. He knew. She probably mentioned it in a Christmas card. And he knew he had to have known that Karen never redid her paperwork, because Grant is the kind of man who watches for that, and he knew that if Karen died before she made a will, he got everything. Everything except what she had already tied up somewhere out of his reach. Rachel. Do you know what this means? Rachel could not speak. It means, Diane said, that Grant Whitfield knew a man in this town who worked in a pharmacy under a false name and was already terrified of being found out by Karen Whitfield. And Grant Whitfield offered that terrified man a very simple bargain. You take care of my problem. I take care of yours. Rachel put her face in her hands. They'll say we're crazy, she whispered. They'll say we're two nurses making it up. They will not say we are two nurses making it up, Diane said, because we are going to give this letter to Detective Marian Alvarez tonight, and Detective Marian Alvarez is going to sit down in a small room with a man named Wayne Corrigan, and she is going to explain to that man that his old friend Grant Whitfield is about to inherit $240,000 from a dead woman, and that his old friend Grant Whitfield is going to walk out of Ohio a wealthy man while he, Wayne Corrigan, spends the rest of his life in prison. And she is going to ask him if that seems fair to him. And I promise you, Rachel Palmer, that Wayne Corrigan is going to have some very interesting things to say. She was right about that too. That night, Detective Alvarez took the notarized letter and the account statement and Karen's little green notebook and everything else, and she went into a room with Wayne Corrigan and his court-appointed lawyer, and she stayed there for 4 hours. And when she came out, she made a phone call. And at 11:15 the next morning, a Friday morning, 2 Millbrook Police Department cruisers and 1 unmarked car pulled up in front of a rented 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. And Grant Whitfield was arrested in his kitchen in his sock feet with a bowl of cereal in his hand. He was charged as an accessory to murder. The bail was denied. The lawyer with the American flags on his website filed a motion to withdraw from the estate proceedings by 4 o'clock that afternoon. The hearing on Monday morning was very short. Judge Estelle Warren, 63 years old, grey-haired, glasses on a beaded chain, listened for 11 minutes to a nervous young attorney from the county represent the hospital, and to Diane Kessler read Karen's notarized letter aloud in a steady voice. And then she looked over her glasses at the empty petitioner's table where Grant Whitfield's lawyer used to be sitting, and she said, "The petition is dismissed. The animal known as Bear will remain in the care of Diane Kessler, RN trustee, and shall continue his current employment as a therapy animal at Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital. The trust funds shall be administered by Ms. Kessler for the animal's benefit under the supervision of this court until the natural end of the animal's life. Any remainder at that time shall be donated to a therapy dog training program of the trustee's choosing. That is the ruling. Get out of my courtroom, all of you. I have real cases. Rachel walked out of the courthouse into the November sunshine with Diane on one side of her and Bear on the other, and she looked up at the sky and she thought, Karen Whitfield, you did this. You are still doing this. From wherever you are still keeping your promises, but there was one promise left. Rachel remembered it 2 nights later, sitting up in bed reading Karen's letter for the 5th or the 10th or the 20th time. The 3rd instruction. Take care of Bear. He doesn't know how to be alone. He was somebody's dog once, before he was mine, and somebody hurt him, and it took me a long time to teach him to sleep. Please do not let him sleep alone. Rachel put the letter down. She looked at Bear, asleep on the rug beside her bed. She thought about the 6 months he had spent walking the hallway of the 4th floor at night, carrying a folded blue uniform out of a closet, laying it on an empty bed. 6 months of not sleeping. 6 months of waiting. 6 months of a promise being held open by a dog because a woman had died before she could close it. She got out of bed. She went into her closet. On the top shelf, in a shoebox, was the paperback novel with the corner of page 112 turned down. It was the one thing of Karen's she had not been able to make herself donate. It smelled, faintly still, of the drugstore lotion Karen used to keep in her locker. She brought the book down. She took it into the living room. She sat down on the couch. Bear got up from the rug and followed her and lay down on her feet. She opened the book to page 112. The page was about nothing much. A woman in the story was standing in her kitchen, wondering whether to call her mother. Karen had turned the corner down before she was done, saving her place, meaning to come back. She had not come back. Rachel closed the book. She put it in her lap. She put her hand on the shepherd's head. Bear, she said, Bear, buddy, listen, she's not coming back. You know that. You knew that before any of us. But listen. Frank came back. Frank came back, and he came back because of you. He came back because you would not stop asking. And there are other people at that hospital who are going to come back too, because of you, because of what you do. Do you hear me? Karen sent you. Karen sent you to us, and she has been sending you every night for 6 months, and we finally figured out how to listen. You did your job. You did it. You can rest now, honey. You can rest. Bear did not open his eyes, but he sighed, a long, deep sigh, the sigh of a dog who had been carrying something for a long time, and Rachel felt the weight of him shift on her feet, and she understood that he had heard her. 3 weeks later, Frank Delgado walked out of Cedar Hill Memorial Hospital under his own power. It was slow. He used a cane. His left side would never be quite what it had been, but he walked out through the double doors of the front lobby on his own 2 feet, and Bear walked beside him on a leash held by Rachel Palmer, and Diane Kessler stood on the sidewalk with her arms folded across her chest, and her mouth doing something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Frank moved into a small ground-floor apartment 2 blocks from the hospital, in a building for seniors that allowed pets. Bear did not live with him. Bear lived with Diane, because Diane was the trustee, and because the money for Bear's food and his vet bills and his heartworm pills came out of an account that Diane had to sign for, and because that was what Karen had wanted. But every morning at 9 o'clock, Bear walked with Diane down the street to Frank's apartment, and every afternoon at 4, Diane picked him up. In between, Frank and Bear walked one slow lap around the block. In the winter, when the ice came, they made it half a lap. In the spring, they made it 2. In the fall of the following year, on the anniversary of Karen's death, they made it all the way to the loading dock of the hospital. And Frank stood in the wet snow in his good coat with his cane in his hand, and he put one hand on the shepherd's shoulder, and he said quietly, so quietly that only the dog heard him, "You kept your promise, Karen. You kept your promise." And so did we. The uniform stayed on the bed in 402. Every night, before the lights dimmed on the fourth floor, whichever nurse was working the swing shift folded the faded blue uniform with the small coffee stain over the pocket and laid it on the empty bed. If the bed had a patient, they laid it on the chair beside the bed. If the room was in use for something else, they laid it on the bench outside the door. Nobody ever moved it after that. It became one of those small hospital rituals that grow up over time, the way certain saints get certain candles lit for them without anybody remembering why. New nurses were told about it on their first day. Old nurses did not have to be told. And once a month, on the 17th, whichever nurse was on shift walked down to Frank Delgado's apartment on her lunch break with a paper bag of table scraps for the shepherd, because that was what Karen had done, because that was how it had all started, and because someone had decided, without any of them ever quite saying it out loud, that a story that had begun with a bag of scraps for a stray at a loading dock should keep going in the same shape. Bear lived for 6 more years. He died on a Tuesday morning in July on the rug beside Diane Kessler's bed, with his chin on his front paws and his eyes half closed, and no more work left to do. Diane sat with him for a long time. Then she got up and she called Rachel, and Rachel drove over, and together the two of them wrapped the shepherd in the coffee-stained uniform, which had been sitting in a folded square on Diane's dresser for 6 years, waiting. They buried him in a small pet cemetery outside of town. The gravestone was flat granite. It said, Bear, Therapy Dog, Cedar Hill, Memorial Hospital. He waited. He found her. He brought her home. Underneath, in smaller letters, was the date of his death and the date of the day 6 years earlier, when a woman named Karen Whitfield had knelt in the snow beside a man named Frank Delgado and had promised him that a stray German shepherd behind the loading dock would be safe no matter what happened. Frank came to the funeral. He was 73 by then, thinner, slower, but still walking. He put his hand on the granite for a long time. He did not cry. He had cried enough. He only said, quietly, one word, the same word he had said in room 404 on the night the shepherd had sung in front of a padlocked closet and had brought a dying old man back to his voice. Karen, he said. The wind moved through the small pet cemetery. Rachel Palmer and Diane Kessler stood on either side of Frank Delgado, and each of them took one of his elbows, and together, slowly, the three of them walked back to the car. And in a hospital across town, on the 4th floor, in a room whose number was 402, a nurse whose name was not Rachel, and not Diane, and not Karen, folded a piece of faded blue fabric with a small brown coffee stain above the pocket, and laid it on the empty bed because it was almost 9 o'clock, and because that was how they did things on that ward, and because somewhere, in the way stories are always still being told, even when nobody is talking, a big German shepherd was still walking down a corridor with something precious in his teeth, laying it gently down and lying beside it and waiting. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about the moment that stayed with you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story we tell, because there are more of them, and they are all still waiting, the way Bear did, for someone to finally listen.